and I'm not saying all conservatives, but Pierre Poilievre has tapped into a base of conservative voters who have made extremely racist comments against immigrants, and we see it online, and what they're doing right now is race baiting, and I find it quite frankly offensive.
What happens when you have a conservative leader who actually tells the truth and use facts, stats, and data to show you exactly how they got from point A to point B? Well, you get a full-blown absolute media meltdown. CBC tried to fact-check things very poorly. So did CTV, but it's fine, guys. It's fine. You can scream ist and phobe all you want, but I got your back. I'm here to fact check you just to make sure that we have the truth, right? I'm Jasmine Lane. Subscribe, like, follow, comment your thoughts down below. And as always, share this video. We are so very tired of the desperation, the spin, the gaslighting, because the numbers actually prove conservatives right. And we are going to be breaking down the entire unhinged media circus on today's episode of Over Opinionated.
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is calling on the federal government to end the temporary foreign worker program. He says the program is flooding the market with cheap labor and contributing to unemployment. But as Evan Dyer reports, not all Canadians would support that move.
One of the very common criticisms when it comes to the temporary foreign worker program has to do with the Conservatives and the fact that under the Conservative government with Stephen Harper, the temporary foreign worker program originally aimed to fill genuine short-term skill gaps that exist. And of course, many people use this in agriculture, sometimes even in healthcare. So like nurses, laborers, that sort of thing, and jobs that legitimately we just didn't have Canadians at the time who were able to perform those duties or really didn't want to, because picking fruit all day in the hot sun is something that a lot of young kids probably don't want to do unless they're going on a little gap year in Australia or something. But so that started in 2006 when Stephen Harper had expanded the program quite a bit. He made it easier for employers to seek out foreign talent, even in things such as fast food and retail sectors. But after public backlash, like maybe even this from Justin Trudeau, where in 2014, he actually writes, CPC temporary foreign workers program lowers Canadian wages and exploits vulnerable people. It needs to be fixed. Well, they actually did do that. They introduced multiple reforms, including splitting the program into two streams, one being the National Mobility Program. They also raised employer standards and increased penalties for misuse. That's a big one, and required that employers must attempt to hire Canadians first. However, when Justin Trudeau came into the scene in 2015, over time, he ended up revoking and rolling back many of those conservative put in place safeguards for the program. And so the result of that was that the TFWs absolutely exploded, especially in low wage positions, which ballooned the number of temporary foreign workers in the country from hundreds of thousands to nearly millions.
Well, in most cases, I don't think they do need temporary foreign workers. I think they hire them because they can pay them less. And it's that simple. They don't want to pay the prevailing wage to the Canadian worker. And so they hire someone from abroad who might be in a desperate situation and willing to take less. And we see it again. Michelle Rempel has been tweeting out these job postings. I think it was it Booster Juice, the one you came out with yesterday? $36 an hour. They're Booster Juice offering $36 an hour to a temporary foreign worker. They specifically say they want it to be a temporary foreign worker. Why aren't they offering those jobs to Canadian kids first? And I'm not now speaking about any particular employer, but we know that there's a lot of abuse in this system where the employers are asking for some of the wage back from their worker. I'm not alleging that for Booster Juice, but it is happening out there. It is a very exploitative system that has allowed corporate elites to profit off of driving wages down and driving jobs out. And we're going to put an end to it.
Really, the most unreal part of all of this is the way in which this story, these facts, are being portrayed to the general public through the mainstream media. I mean, take a listen to what CBC has to say about what Pierre Poilievre did, and then we'll just fact check that with what liberals have very recently said about the exact same issue.
Oh, like that's exactly the problem with Poilievre's comments. Like, throw the baby out with the bathwater all the time. They just always speak speak in absolutes, and there's such a mischaracterization. Like I agree with what Brad said. I agree with what Tim said. I think that there are challenges with the program. I think the Prime Minister said the same thing. There are fixes to be had, but you're villainizing all businesses. All businesses must be looking for cheap labor. Small businesses must be looking for cheap labor. That's not the truth. And Dan Kelly from CFIB, the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, came out today with a smackdown to Poilievre and said, listen, there's a few things at play here. In many cases, these jobs are in rural and remote parts of Canada. There isn't a bunch of Canadian youth who are lined up waiting for those jobs in rural Saskatchewan to wash dishes. It's just not happening.
Before I fact check her, I do just want to give credit where credit is due, and she is very pretty. So at least she has that going for her. Unfortunately, though, she's doing the typical political thing where you are highlighting. This is something that business groups in Ottawa highlight so much, and it is just sick to me how they do this. They're highlighting rural farm jobs, agriculture, fisheries, while completely downplaying that the fastest growing sector of the temporary foreign worker program is actually in accommodation and food services. So we're talking things like Tim Hortons, Burger King, stuff like that. And of course, I'm not accusing every single industry or every single franchisee owner of taking advantage of this, but it is a fact that is the fastest growing. It is true. It is happening. And that's not rural. No. We're talking franchises and chains and things inside of strip malls or just regular malls. That's where the problem exists. And you know, that's the part that's so frustrating is don't let them fool you, because this isn't just about farms. It isn't. And if the TFW program was only about farms, we'd have a debate going on here, but it's not. It is in fact fueling cheap labor at chains on every street corner, and they sell it to you as this rural, hard to fill jobs that young Canadians don't want. But the reality is that it's actually the local place that you go to get your coffee from in most cases, and increasingly so. In fact, Mark Miller, a man whose face I was hoping I'd never have to freaking see again, he even talked about this, and I have to show you now because, well, he said it.
I mean, look, there's a lot of conversations with different competing policy priorities. You have industries in low-skilled labor, whether it's big box shops or others looking for cheap labor and wanting to make sure that they maintain a 40-hour work week for some of the students. That's the competing policy with the labor gap that we face in this country, and we need those people working. And why not? If they're paying a whole heck of a lot of money to come to Canada to study more than a domestic student, why would we deny them that right? So some competing issues there that we need to really tackle with. Obviously juggling sometimes competing policy needs. That's over and above the discussions on the integrity of the system and fraud that we are tackling first and foremost, and then the role of the provinces to kind of fix a problem that has been nothing but growing in the last few years.
And then yesterday, after Pierre Poilievre's announcement, Mark Carney says, yeah, no, I've been talking to business owners and whatnot, and they've been telling me that the second most important issue to them is the reliance on temporary foreign workers.
Because those employers would have to shut down if they didn't have employees who would work the kinds of jobs the Canadian youth, frankly, are not lining up for. So when you conflate the issues, when you say things like we're boxing out Canadian youth from getting jobs, you inflame an issue that doesn't need to be inflamed instead of constructively looking at a policy and saying, what could we tweak or manage here to make it more productive for the country? You're playing politics with good policy, and that's a problem.
First things first, there have been plenty of attempts, plenty of conversations, meetings, and discussions that have led to absolutely nothing when it comes to reform. If there's anything the Liberal government really, really hates outside of you as a Canadian citizen, obviously judging by their policies and what they've done to your life over the last decade and your opportunity and hope, they hate reform. They do not like changing things, even when it's really bad. What they do like doing, though, is in exploding the government, pretending as though that's a change, and usually it just makes things worse. We'll get to that in a second. But to wrap up this topic, this is one of my favorite excuses that big business and Ottawa likes to use. And it is just so awesome that Mark Carney decided to go on and say, yeah, well, businesses are telling me that they really need it. So it's so compassionate and sympathetic, and it's just for our farmers. Let's be real here. These jobs are not going to temporary foreign workers because Canadians don't want the jobs, okay? So let's just really cut through that. The reality is that the pay is too low. Many of these jobs in both fast food and agriculture, actually in services, pay close to minimum wage, while the cost of living has absolutely skyrocketed. A 20-year-old in Ontario making, I don't know, $16 to $17 an hour at Tim Hortons simply cannot afford rent, food, and transportation for a wage like that these days. And the labor shortage is actually just a wage shortage. Going with inflation and what that has done to our economy, most people should have received at bare minimum 20% of a pay increase in the last 5 years. Have you? No. Yeah, most people don't. Most people, you get excited when you get an extra $100 on your paycheck. That's nowhere near what is needed for an affordable cost of living. You could take the Liberals and what they shell out to refugees as an example of that. They give them approximately $86,000 a year for essentials, because that is what is needed to basically survive in Canada. But the average Canadian wage from province to province is anywhere from $62,000 to $67,000 a year. That's significantly short of what the Liberals have already predetermined is needed to survive at a bare minimum in this country, being the roughly 86 grand a year that asylum seekers get so that they don't starve to death or freeze to death. Policy incentives are also a big one, because Ottawa does make it easier and cheaper for businesses to get TFW permits than to invest in training or paying Canadians more.
Quite frankly, was infuriating. I'm going to be quite frank and honest. We are the Conservative Party, and Pierre Poilievre and MP Rempel are treading a very dangerous line of what I'm going to call a dog whistle of racism.
The IRCC even admits that 75% of these workers are in low-wage sectors that directly compete with young Canadians. They also admit, and they have the stats to prove it, that the Liberals have already blown past their cap of 82,000 temporary foreign workers this year alone.
Because if you want to have a conversation about the fact that we have an issue with immigration, we do, not because they're immigrants and they're coming in and taking away. It's because our society and our system hasn't kept up. We don't have enough housing. We don't have enough resource put in place to help everybody. So let's have that conversation. But to say it's foreign workers that are taking away jobs from Canadians and the solution is youth, to me is simplistic. It's nonsense. And honestly, it's like, let's talk about taxi drivers, for example, in major cities. There is a reason why taxi drivers look like my skin tone, because unfortunately there are people who come to this country who are willing to do jobs that we're not going to get other people to do.
Holy moly, what a terrible example that was. Do you want to know why there's not of Caucasian Canadians driving taxis or Indigenous Canadians driving taxis? That's probably because, factually speaking, here in many cities, Toronto, Calgary, Vancouver, as an example, taxi licenses and medallions have historically been purchased by South Asian and Middle Eastern entrepreneurs who immigrated to Canada to be entrepreneurs. So new arrivals typically will find opportunities within their own community network. That goes for anybody who's immigrating to a new country, buying into taxi services, leasing cars, working under a friend or family who owns that taxi license. That's how that works. So no, this isn't because Canadians don't want to drive taxis. This is because immigrant communities built the industry infrastructure, which of course we're grateful for them for doing, because yeah, we needed that, I guess, but that's why. That has nothing to do with race. What the heck? And also, Uber or Lyft is a perfect example to totally kibosh this, because when they entered and disrupted the market of taxi driving, suddenly anybody could drive without having to spend thousands or tens of thousands of dollars on buying a taxi medallion. And that's why you now see a much wider mix of all sorts of people from all over the place who drive Ubers or Lyfts. I got picked up when I went to Nashville by a retiree. I got driven home by a Ukrainian immigrant here in the province that I live in. That's just so ignorant and stupid to say while you're going on a rant trying to accuse everybody else of being an ist or phobe because they're highlighting a very real problem, and then you use a very nonsensical argument that isn't even based in fact or logic or reason.
And quite frankly, like, I found it offensive because what they're doing is they're tapping into the people, and I'm not saying all conservatives, but Pierre Poilievre has tapped into a base of conservative voters who have made extremely racist comments against immigrants. We saw that when we saw universities and colleges abusing foreign student attendance in their schools, and we see it online. And what they're doing right now is race baiting, and I find it, quite frankly, offensive.
The UN, for crying out loud, has even called Canada's program a breeding ground for modern slavery. So who is really racist? What is really racist? Pretending that exploitation is fine as long as it's hidden behind feel-good rhetoric? Calling critics racist is a smokescreen to silence the debate and to protect big business. And you want to know something? There is nothing racist at all about saying that Canadians deserve the first shot at Canadian jobs. That's called common sense. That's called how most of the rest of the world works. Ottawa itself, the Liberals themselves, have admitted that there is essentially a black market in these permits, proving that the system is being gamed, and they haven't done anything about it. One thing that they have done, though, according to the IRCC on X, is actually started to reduce the number of international students coming to Canada by what they call a sustainable level. We will see how all of that pans out over the next number of years. But where the heck is CBC going off about this one? Wow, you're going to cancel the opportunity for international students to come? That's so ist and phobic. No, it's not. We have a youth unemployment crisis. We have an unemployment crisis in general, honestly. We have massive wage suppression. We don't have housing. And all of these things are just so frustrating to me as somebody where I go through this data all the time. I'm constantly trying to double fact check myself just to make sure things are good. I still get things wrong sometimes. I'm a human, but like Canada as a whole, the reason why they rely so much on temporary foreign workers, on mass immigration, is solely because of our weak productivity growth. A real economy does not come from mass importing people of whom you cannot sustainably hold. It does not come from subsidizing failing industries. It comes from productivity gains, workers who are producing more value per hour. And Canada is almost dead last across the board in the developed world. Our productivity is collapsing. Statistics Canada just confirmed that we are poorer today than we were in 2019. And so without productivity gains, your wages don't increase. That's why you need this stuff. That's why it's so important. And so even though the cost of living is rising, people aren't making enough money to make ends meet. Even people who have had long time careers are not.
Problem, challenge, depending on how you want to frame it, is where your economic growth is going to come from. Last week, Champagne, all too aware that Canada's economy showed signs of shrinkage in the second quarter of this year. It is unclear, despite some semi-encouraging trade statistics today, whether the troubles and the headwinds, if you will, from Donald Trump's tariff policies are going to continue to dog Canadian fortunes, specifically adding uncertainty, causing businesses to hold off on investments, lay people off, or not hire people when otherwise they would because they're not sure about the wisdom of the road ahead. And of course, in the past, a lot of Canada's economic growth came from immigration. In fact, again, through new numbers that we're starting to see, we know that the efforts that began under Justin Trudeau's previous minister, Mark Miller, to roll back the number of newcomers coming into this country are working. There are fewer temporary residents coming in. There are fewer visas being issued. Those targets, those caps, are limiting population growth, causing it to go flat. So you can't look there for your economic growth.
And yeah, right now we're talking about the workers, because that's who all those big businesses that the Liberals want to tax so hard employ and pay for. That's what keeps our country afloat, is all of those big businesses. That's why tax the rich is the dumbest thing ever. Case in point, our own data coming out of our country. When businesses face red tape, high taxes, caps, high energy costs, stupid hurdles that nowhere else has, they leave. And then Canada, with leaders like Doug Ford, Chrystia Freeland, Mark Carney and every liberal who is just spoon-fed this BS. Oh, you're a traitor. Oh, darn you. You're a traitor for leaving this highly uncompetitive, absolutely economically disastrous country. No, I'm trying to save myself, actually. That doesn't make me a traitor. That's called survival instinct. And sometimes people do what's in their best interest. And we should actually encourage that. And if you're mad at them for being a traitor, perhaps you should ask the real question, which is, why is Canada in a situation where this is the reality to begin with? And why is it that mainstream media is just so gung-ho on defending and protecting and not thinking, really deeply thinking about what's going on here? Could it be like this? This was exposed by Juno News a few days ago. CBC also has temporary foreign workers, computer programmers, network technicians, business management consulting, marketing researchers, and consultants. And you know what's the weirdest one too? CBC, which is supposed to be about Canada's identity, right? That's why Mark Carney gives them so much money. That's why the Liberals have always given them so much money, even though their business model is clearly in dire need of saving because they cannot create it on their own, despite having all of the tools at their disposal to be able to do so. They also hired foreign workers to be announcers and other broadcasters. That's weird, considering that it's all about Canadian national identity and stuff. Broadcast technicians, web designers and developers, interactive media developers. I wonder why they would be so vehemently against removing this so that they might actually have to pay broadcasters a fair wage, for all of the incredibly insane hours that they work, hours that I do not miss at all. And I can confirm as well, being in media for 11 years prior to doing this, media wages have not budged at all. Announcer jobs, you get paid the exact same amount that you did 10, 15 years ago, even. That was considered a good wage back then. And it's just so frustrating because, like so many other things in this country, we once had a system that worked very well. An immigration system, a temporary foreign worker system, an international student system. We had things that worked. Were there hiccups in the road? Yes, and they were corrected. Steps were actually made to correct them. And nowadays, we've had a government over the last decade that is very slow moving. And they will only make corrections if absolutely necessary to. And at that point, it's often too late. And the fact that you have mainstream media suggesting that this has anything to do with where somebody comes from and not what's actually going wrong here is just absurd. I don't know how else to explain it. It's absolutely absurd. I'm Jasmine Lane. Thank you so much for watching. There was so much other stuff I wanted to talk about today. Why does this always happen? I get too heated. I need to self-control, my girl. But I will be back with you tomorrow talking about Danielle Smith and a video that she just published that will certainly have Mark Carney running around with his tail in between his legs, as well as the police who are very frustrated by and actually fully calling out the Liberal government right now. It's deserved. I'm quite sure of that one. And so much more. Be sure to subscribe, like, follow, comment your thoughts down below, and share this video. And I will talk to you tomorrow.